give more than others. You listen, support, forgive, and show up. Yet somehow, the more you give, the less you matter. People interrupt you, delay you, disrespect you, and assume you will always remain. This video explains why human psychology punishes goodness with neglect, and how to reverse being taken for granted without begging, arguing, or changing who you are. The human mind does not evaluate worth through morality, intention, or emotional sincerity. It evaluates worth through pressure, cost, and consequence. This is the first uncomfortable truth most people refuse to accept. When you are consistently kind, endlessly understanding, and permanently available, you believe you are building goodwill. In reality, you are training the people around you to psychologically downgrade you. Not because they are evil, but because the human psyche is structured to associate value with limitation, not generosity. Kindness that has no boundaries becomes predictable, and predictability removes tension. Tension is the invisible force that keeps attention alive. When your behavior becomes certain, the mind stops tracking it. This is why people cherish rare moments and ignore daily ones. The brain is an efficiency machine. It allocates emotional energy only where loss is possible. When your presence feels guaranteed, the brain unconsciously categorizes you as permanent background rather than a focal point. Consistent kindness signals that your emotional resources are infinite, and anything perceived as infinite is treated as cheap. This is not a conscious calculation. No one wakes up and decides to disrespect a kind person. The shift happens silently, beneath awareness. Small delays in responding turn into larger ones. Minor dismissals turn into habitual disregard. The tone used with you becomes casual, then careless, then entitled. This is how being taken for granted is formed. Not through cruelty, but through repetition without consequence. The problem is not kindness itself. The problem is kindness without friction. When kindness is not paired with selectivity, it teaches others that access to you requires no effort, no adjustment, no respect. The mind then concludes that losing you would cost nothing, and what costs nothing is handled with carelessness. This is why people often mistreat those who love them most, while behaving cautiously around those who might walk away. Fear of loss sharpens perception. Absence of fear dulls it. There is also a deeper psychological distortion at play. When you give consistently without resistance, people begin to assume that your kindness is a reflection of your position, not your choice. They stop seeing it as generosity and start seeing it as obligation. Your help becomes expected. Your patience becomes owed. Your forgiveness becomes a resource to be exploited. At this stage, withdrawing even slightly causes shock and resentment because the mind is already rewritten the narrative. You are no longer a person offering kindness. You are a function designed to provide comfort. This is why overgiving quietly erodes respect. The more you tolerate, the more others learn how little they must offer to keep you. Human psychology adapts downward, not upward. People rarely rise to meet generosity. They sink to the level required to maintain access. And once that level stabilizes, raising it feels offensive to them. This is why boundaries introduced late are met with resistance, anger, or accusations of change. You are not changing. You are correcting an imbalance that should never have existed. Kindness becomes dangerous when it removes the perception of choice. The moment others believe you cannot say no, your yes loses meaning. Value is inseparable from the ability to withhold. If something cannot be withheld, it cannot be valued. This is why admiration follows restraint, not excess. Why dignity is associated with reserve, not availability. Why those who give less are often treated with more care. The tragedy is that the kind individual often interprets being taken for granted as a signal to give more. They double their effort, hoping to be seen. But increased giving only accelerates the process. Each additional sacrifice confirms a belief that you require nothing in return. And eventually, the very traits you believed would secure connection become the reason you are overlooked. Being taken for granted is not proof that kindness fails. It is proof that kindness without limits dissolves identity. When you give without conditions, you erase the psychological markers that signal value. You disappear into usefulness. And usefulness, unlike respect, does not inspire care. Human respect does not emerge from warmth, agreement, or emotional openness. It emerges from resistance. This is not a cultural flaw or modern corruption. It is an ancient psychological law rooted in how the human mind detects strength. The psyche is instinctively drawn to what cannot be easily accessed, influenced, or absorbed. When something resists consumption, it signals autonomy. Autonomy signals power. And power commands respect long before kindness ever does. Availability communicates the opposite. When you are always reachable, always agreeable, always emotionally present, the mind does not interpret this as generosity. It interprets it as submission to access. The more consistently available you are, the less significant your presence becomes. This is because availability removes uncertainty, and uncertainty is a raw material of attention. Without it, interest decays. Respect withers. What remains is familiarity, and familiarity breeds psychological dismissal rather than closeness. The human mind does not respect what it can fully predict. Predictability creates a sense of control, and control breeds contempt. This is why people often speak more carefully to strangers than to those closest to them. The stranger is unknown, and therefore carries risk. The always available person carries none. When you remove all friction from interaction, you remove the need for self-regulation in others. They no longer monitor their behavior around you because they sense no consequence for missteps. Resistance functions as a mirror. It reflects back to others that you possess an internal boundary they cannot cross without permission. This boundary forces a psyche to pause. And in that pause, respect is born. Not admiration, not affection, but recognition. Recognition that you are not an extension of their needs. Recognition that your time, attention, and emotional energy are not public property. Without this recognition, you are not perceived as a person but as a resource. This is why people chase those who are emotionally restrained and neglect those who are emotionally generous. Restraint creates distance. Distance creates tension. Tension creates value. The mind fills gaps with imagination, and imagination inflates importance. When you are always present, there is nothing left to imagine. No mystery, no risk, no urgency. The psyche disengages not because it dislikes you, but because you no longer stimulate its evaluative systems. Resistance also signals self-respect. When you do not immediately respond, immediately agree, or immediately forgive, you communicate that you are governed by an internal standard rather than external demand. This triggers an unconscious recalibration in others. They begin to measure their behavior more carefully. They adjust, they hesitate, and hesitation is the first sign that respect has entered the dynamic. Availability, on the other hand, teaches others how to treat you. Every time you tolerate disregard without consequence, you are instructing them on the acceptable level of effort required to keep you. Over time, that effort drops, not out of malice, but adaptation. The psyche always seeks efficiency. If respect is not required, it is not offered. If resistance is absent, overreach becomes natural. There is a common misunderstanding that resistance equals hostility. It does not. Resistance is not aggression. It is not coldness. It is selective openness. It is a quiet refusal to over-explain, overgive, and overstay. It is the ability to withdraw without drama and return without apology. This form of restraint unsettles those accustomed to unrestricted access because it removes their sense of dominance over the interaction. The most revealing moment in any relationship is not how someone behaves when you are agreeable, but how they react when you are unavailable. Respectful minds adjust. Entitled mind protest. The reaction exposes the underlying power dynamic. If your absence triggers anger rather than curiosity, it is because your availability has been taken as a right, not a privilege. Human nature respects resistance because resistance implies choice, and choice implies independence. Independence implies that you could leave, deny, or disengage, and anything that can leave must be handled with care. This is the unspoken logic governing attraction, authority, and social hierarchy. Those who resist are treated cautiously. Those who are always available are treated casually. The human mind forms attachment through effort, not through reward. This principle operates quietly, shaping how value is assigned without ever entering conscious awareness. People do not treasure what they receive easily. They treasure what demands something from them. Time, attention, restraint, adjustment, sacrifice. When none of these are required, appreciation does not emerge. Instead, a subtle form of contempt begins to take shape, not loud or cruel, but dismissive and careless. Effort creates psychological investment. The more energy someone spends to maintain access to you, the more their identity becomes entangled with that access. Losing you then feels like losing a part of themselves. Without effort, there is no internal stake. And without a stake, there is no fear of loss. This is why people casually neglect those who make everything easy, while anxiously protecting relationships that feel demanding or uncertain. When you require nothing, you invite nothing. The mind unconsciously asks a simple question: if this person gives so much for free, what could their presence truly be worth? This is not logical reasoning. It is instinctive inference. Value, in the psychological sense, is always measured against cost. When cost approaches zero, perceived value follows. This law explains why people sometimes mistreat the most supportive individual in their life. Support that arrives without challenge erodes the sense of reciprocity. The receiver begins to feel superior, not grateful. Gratitude requires humility, and humility only emerges when effort has been expended. Without effort, the balance tilts. The giver descends in status. The receiver rises, and status imbalance is fertile ground for contempt. Contempt does not always express itself as insult or cruelty. More often, it appears as delay, assumption, interruption, and disregard. Messages are answered later. Boundaries are crossed casually. Promises are broken without apology. The person being taken for granted senses something has shifted but cannot name it. What has shifted is the internal valuation system of the other person. The absence of required effort has quietly reduced perceived importance. The most corrosive effect of overgiving is that it removes the need for others to self-regulate. When someone must work to keep you, they monitor themselves. They choose their words. They restrain their impulses. Effort forces reflection. But when access is effortless, restraint disappears. People become blunt, careless, and entitled, not because they dislike you, but because nothing in the dynamic demands respect. This is why effort must flow in both directions for dignity to exist. A one-sided exchange always collapses into hierarchy. The one who gives becomes lower. The one who receives becomes higher. Over time, the higher position breeds unconscious disdain. The receiver may still say kind things, still rely on you, still keep you around. But internally, they no longer fear losing you. And without fear, there is no reverence. The psychological law of effort also explains why sudden withdrawal shocks people. When the giver finally stops, the receiver experiences discomfort, not because of emotional loss, but because of disrupted convenience. What was once easy now requires adjustment, and that adjustment reveals how much had been taken for granted. The shock often manifests as anger or confusion rather than reflection, because the receiver was never aware of the imbalance while it benefited them. Effort dignifies relationships. It forces equality. It reminds both parties that access is conditional, not guaranteed. Without this reminder, the human mind defaults to exploitation, not intentionally, but efficiently. It takes what is offered freely and allocates care elsewhere. This is not a moral judgment. It is a psychological mechanism. And ignoring it does not make one virtuous. It makes one invisible. Contempt is not born from hatred. It is born from ease. When someone does not have to work for you, they do not work to keep you. And when they do not work to keep you, they slowly stop seeing you as someone who can be lost. Power does not announce itself through noise, explanation, or emotional display. It emerges through absence. Silence, when deliberate, disrupts psychological patterns more effectively than confrontation ever could. The human mind is deeply unsettled by what it cannot immediately access, interpret, or control. When you remove your voice, your availability, and your predictable presence, you interrupt the internal narrative others have constructed about you. And in that interruption, power quietly returns. Silence creates space, and space forces reflection. When you are always present, there is no reason for others to think about you. Your role is fixed. Your behavior is assumed. But the moment you withdraw, the mind begins to fill the gap. Questions arise. Assumptions are re-evaluated. The absence becomes louder than any explanation could have been. This is why silence is often mistaken for weakness by those who rely on dominance, but experience as authority by those who understand human psychology. Absence reintroduces uncertainty, and uncertainty reactivates value. The mind pays attention to what it might lose. When you step back without drama, without warning, without justification, you remove the illusion of permanence. Others are forced to confront a reality they had ignored. Your presence was a choice, not a fixture. This realization destabilizes entitlement. It shifts the internal balance from consumption to consideration. Withdrawal also restores internal alignment. When you stop overgiving, you reclaim energy that had been leaking outward. This reclaimed energy changes your posture, your tone, your pace. Others sense this shift before they consciously understand it. You no longer seek validation. You no longer chase resolution. This self-containment alters how you are perceived. The mind reads containment as strength because it suggests that you are sufficient unto yourself. Silence denies others the comfort of emotional access. When people are accustomed to your explanations, your reassurances, your emotional labor, removing these comforts creates discomfort. This discomfort is often misinterpreted as punishment, but it is simply the natural consequence of disrupted dependency. Dependency thrives on predictability. When predictability is removed, dependency weakens. And where dependency weakens, respect can emerge. Withdrawal forces recalibration. Those who valued you will adjust their behavior to regain alignment. Those who only consumed you will react with irritation or guilt-driven pressure. The difference becomes visible. Silence exposes motives that words never could. It separates those who respected you from those who merely benefited from you. There is also a crucial internal transformation that occurs through withdrawal. You stop explaining yourself. Explanation is often an unconscious attempt to maintain connection at the cost of dignity. When you withdraw, you accept that not everyone needs to understand you. This acceptance strengthens self-respect. And self-respect alters every interaction that follows. You no longer negotiate your worth. You embody it. Absence teaches others how to treat you without you having to instruct them. When access becomes conditional, behavior improves. Tone softens. Effort increases. Not because you demanded it, but because the psychological environment changed. People adjust to power more readily than they respond to requests. This is why withdrawal is more effective than confrontation. Confrontation invites resistance. Withdrawal invites correction. Silence also removes you from reactive cycles. When you stop responding immediately, stop defending, stop clarifying, you regain control of timing. Control of timing is control of power. The one who can wait is not dependent, and dependence is the opposite of authority. This is why those who rush are overlooked, while those who pause are noticed. Power is not reclaimed by becoming harsh or cruel. It is reclaimed by becoming selective, by deciding where your presence belongs and where it does not. Silence, absence, and withdrawal are not weapons. They are filters. They reveal who notices, who adjusts, and who does not. And once this revelation occurs, the social hierarchy reorganizes itself without force, without argument, without explanation.